Hello everyone, welcome back to my channel. So now today we are going to continue neurology, and in that we are going to discuss CNS tracts. Okay, so to first of all going in detail, we are going to discuss the basic of CNS tracts. Okay, so tracts are divided into two parts, like two types: ascending or descending. So first of all, we have to understand what is this ascending tract and what is that descending tract. Okay, so ascending tract means something is going from the periphery to the central nervous system, and descending means something is coming, that tract is coming from the central nervous system to the periphery. Okay, so why does this happen? So sensory system. Okay, so sensory system means it is whether it is touch, pain, temperature, pressure, vibration, all those things. Those are the sensations, and they'll be sensed on the part of the body from which the nerves will carry this information into the CNS, first in the spinal cord and then from the spine through the spinal cord in the brain, especially in the sensory cortex present in parietal lobe. Okay, there is a connection between sensory cortex and motor cortex in the brain. From that sensory cortex, the information will go to the motor cortex, and motor cortex will send the information down the spinal cord, through the spinal cord, into the periphery, that is into the muscles. So if it is needed, for example, if there is a painful stimulus, okay, if you stimulate, if you that stimulation is carried by the sensory nerve into the CNS, into the spinal cord, so the reflex is working at the level of the spinal cord and also at the level of the brain. So the withdrawal reflex, okay, that after painful stimuli that occurs is because of that descending path of the motor nerve. So this is why it is known as ascending and descending paths. Okay, now ascending tracts are dorsal column, spinothalamic tract, and spinocerebellar tract. Okay, so this are dorsal column is dorsal, as the name suggests, it is present posteriorly in the spinal cord. That's why its name is dorsal column. We'll discuss the function of this column. Okay, spinothalamic tract. Spinothalamic means, first of all, you have to understand that thalamus has different nuclei. One of them is VPL nuclei, that is ventro-postero-lateral nuclei. Okay, this is a sensory nuclei, and all the dorsal column and spinothalamic tract will go to the brain through this thalamus. So first they'll go into the thalamus and then they'll go into the brain. Okay, this is just basic. We are going to discuss this in the detail. Spinocerebellar tract. Okay, so spinocerebellar tract also goes from spinal cord to the cerebellum. Okay, I'll discuss the function in this next slide. Descending tract. Descending tract is composed of two types of tracts. First is pyramidal tract, or also known as corticospinal tract. Corticospinal tract, that means it is descending from the cortex to the spinal cord. So that's why it's named corticospinal tract. Another system apart from pyramidal system that is controlling the muscles are extrapyramidal system. Okay, so there are different parts for extrapyramidal system. There are four extrapyramidal tracts that we'll discuss later on. Okay, so this is the basic of ascending and descending tracts. So now we'll discuss sensory system first, that is descending tracts, ascending tracts, sensory system. Okay, so first of all, what are the sensations that we feel? Okay, so first is touch. Okay, touch is of two types. It is fine touch and it is crude touch. Okay, so as the sometimes, I just want to point out this crude touch we test by using cotton. So I tend to remember like C for C. Okay, why? Because so there is a misunderstanding that fine, because cotton is so fine, they think cotton is used to test fine touch, but it is wrong. For crude touch we use cotton. For fine touch we use any blunted object to feel the touch. Okay, so these are the two types of touch. Second, one more thing, fine touch requires fast conduction. Just remember this when we'll discuss the tract, it will be important. Second is vibration, pressure, and proprioception. Okay, so vibration and pressure, Now what is proprioception? Proprioception is the sense of the joint position. So where are your joints positioned in the spatial sense of joint position? So this is known as proprioception. Okay, now it can be either conscious, It is at the conscious level you realize your joint position sense, or it can be conscious or it can be unconscious. Okay, so at the level of consciousness, like you are conscious about your joint position, that is carried by a different tract, and unconscious perception of sense of joint position, this is different. So unconscious part, okay, unconscious, whenever it is there, it is always cerebellum involved in this. Okay, cerebellum, and conscious proprioception is by dorsal column. Okay, so just remember this, that unconsciously your body knows, unconsciously your brain knows where are your joints position, where are your muscles position. So this is by cerebellum. When you are consciously knowing, okay, that is by dorsal column. Okay, now proprioception is little bit different, so I'm going to discuss little bit. Okay, so proprioception is transmitted by the receptors that are present in the tendon. Okay, it is known as Golgi tendon organs, GTO. Okay, these are the receptors for the proprioception. Okay, they are present in the tendon. Actually, they are present between the at the junction of muscle and the tendon, and they give us the idea about, because they are related to the muscle and they are related to the joint at their attachment. It gives us an idea about the joint position sense. Okay, and the position of our limbs. So Golgi tendon organs are the receptors for proprioception. Two more sensory system, two more sensations are pain and temperature. Okay, so these are two more important. Pain, as you know, it will be carried by free nerve endings that are present in the skin. Touch has their own receptors, vibration and pressure has their own receptors. Okay, so this is just a general idea about sensory system. Now dorsal column. Okay, so we'll start with dorsal column. It is a very important column and or a tract. Okay, so dorsal column, the name itself suggests that it is present dorsally in the spinal cord. Now we'll understand the pathway of the dorsal column. So dorsal column, first of all, what is the function of dorsal column? Vibration. It transmits the sensation of vibration, pressure, proprioception. And remember, I told you touch are of two types, fine and crude. Fine requires faster conduction of the sensation. So fine touch is by dorsal column. Okay, why dorsal column? Dorsal column is heavily myelinated. So corticospinal tract and dorsal column. You know, corticospinal tract is a descending or a motor system. So it is heavily myelinated. Dorsal column is a sensory system. It is heavily myelinated. Spinothalamic tract is not heavily myelinated. It is a combination of two types of fibers, that is A delta nerve fibers and C fibers. C fibers are unmyelinated and A delta fibers are less myelinated. So dorsal column is one of the heavily myelinated sensory tract, and it carries the sensation very fast. So as I told you in the last slide, fine, you remember, fast. Okay, so fine touch is carried by dorsal column. Fine is equal to fast. Fast means heavily myelinated nerves unit. You know that more the myelination, faster is the conduction. Okay, so I hope this is easier to remember. So these are the sensations that it carries. Okay, now proprioception, I told you already, GTO is the receptor. So from this receptor, the nerves are coming to the dorsal ganglion. Okay, as you can see here, they are coming to the dorsal ganglion. So dorsal root ganglion. Okay, so you know spinal cord has white matter outside and gray matter inside. Okay, gray matter is made up of ganglions, or you can say cell bodies of the neurons. White matter is made up of axons, especially myelinated axons. Okay, not necessary always, but that's why it's called white matter, because it is myelinated. Okay, so dorsal, and one more thing, there is like ventral root is responsible for motor system, is considered a part of motor system, and dorsal root, okay, which is a part of gray matter, as you can see. Okay, dorsal root is not the part of gray matter. Dorsal root is the sensory system. It's a part of sensory system. So dorsal root has a ganglion. Okay, so that dorsal root, from the dorsal root, first order neuron starts for dorsal column. Okay, and they travel in the spinal cord on the same side. So if the dorsal column nerve is starting from the right upper limb, okay, it will travel on the same side in the spinal cord. That means on the right side only, in the fasciculus cuneatus and fasciculus gracilis. Gracilis is medial, cuneatus is lateral. Okay, so you can remember as GMCL. Okay, then in the medulla, they will decussate or they will cross on the opposite side. So from the right upper limb, the sensation of dorsal column will decussate or cross over the left side, and ultimately it will go into the left thalamus. So from this, in the medulla, there are two nuclei gracilis and nuclei cuneatus. Again, the same alignment, that gracilis is medial and cuneatus is lateral. Okay, there they will synapse, and synapse with second order neuron that starts from this nuclei and go to the thalamus, that is VPL nucleus in thalamus, and from the thalamus third order neuron starts and goes to the postcentral gyrus. Postcentral gyrus means it is a sensory cortex present in the parietal lobe. So there is a central gyrus. Anterior to it is the frontal lobe, and there are motor system or motor cortex. Posterior to the central gyrus is the parietal lobe, and there is a sensory cortex. So it will go into the post-central gyrus. Okay. So remember, first order neuron starts from dorsal root ganglion, travels in the fasciculus gracilis and cuneatus. In the medulla, it synapses with the second order neuron in the nucleus gracilis and cuneatus. The second order neuron decussates on the opposite sides in the medulla. Okay, and it forms the second order neuron and synapses in the thalamus with the third order neuron, and from that third order neuron, from the thalamus, from the VPL nucleus, it will go into the postcentral gyrus. So I hope I am clear with this. Okay. Now, spinothalamic tract. Spinothalamic tract. What is the function of spinothalamic tract? That we have to understand. Okay. So function of, so I told you there are two types of touch. Fine touch is by dorsal column. Crude touch, which is tested by using cotton. Okay, it is transmitted by spinothalamic tract, especially anterior spinothalamic tract. Okay, and other is pain and temperature. Okay, so these three sensations are by spinothalamic tract, especially lateral spinothalamic tract. Now, the pathway of the spinothalamic tract is completely different from the dorsal column, even though they are part of the same sensory system. Okay, so as I told you, pain has the free nerve endings present in the skin. So from that free nerve endings, the neurons will come into the dorsal root ganglion. Okay, and then they will form from the dorsal root ganglion. There is a central process. Okay, that comes out and gives us the first order neuron. Now, in the spinal cord, okay, it will come in the dorsal horn. Okay, dorsal horn, it will travel on the same side for two segments. Okay, it will travel for two segments. Okay, and after two segments, after traveling on the same side for two segments in Lissor tract, this is the name of the tract. Okay, after traveling two segments, it will cross on the opposite side. Okay, via anterior white commissure. Okay, so as you can see, it is traveling through this commissure. Okay, so first order neuron is from this dorsal root ganglion till the substantia gelatinosa. That is two segments above the segment from which this nerve entered the spinal cord. So substantia gelatinosa of grey matter on the same side but two segments above it. Okay, there the first order neuron will synapse with the second order neuron. Then the second order neuron, two segments above the level of the segment from which this nerve entered, okay, it will cross on the opposite side. So dorsal column was crossing in the medulla, but spinothalamic tract will cross in the spinal cord only, but two segments above the entrance of the segment. Okay, so this is simple. First order neuron is from dorsal root ganglion to the substantia gelatinosa on the same side but above two segments. Okay, then from the substantia gelatinosa there is a second order neuron that comes out and it crosses through the anterior white commissure. Okay, and it travels on the anterolateral part of the white matter of spinal cord. Okay, that is what will form anterolateral spinothalamic tract. Okay, then this will be a second order neuron. After crossing, it will travel in the white matter, okay, as a spinothalamic tract. It will reach the thalamus, okay, again VPL nucleus. From VPL nucleus, it will synapse with third order neuron. Third order neuron will enter the postcentral gyrus. Okay, so the difference between dorsal column and spinothalamic tract is this only. The dorsal column in the spinal cord, it travels ipsilaterally, while spinothalamic tract, it travels ipsilaterally for only 2 segments, and then it crosses on the opposite side. So why this is important? Whenever there is a spinal cord lesions, the dorsal column is the dorsal column and the spinothalamic tract are affected of the different sides. Okay, that's why this anatomy is very important. Okay, now spinocerebellar tract. Spinocerebellar tract are, there can be dorsal and ventral spinocerebellar tract. They are responsible for unconscious proprioception directly to the cerebellum. I have already told you this tract is not that important, but just remember that it travels from spinal cord to the cerebellum. Golgi tendon organ to the spinal cord to the cerebellum. Okay, and the one more thing is dorsal column is providing the information of proprioception from one side to the contralateral cortex, but spinocerebellar tract will provide the information of, that is unconscious proprioception of ipsilateral side. So from, if the Golgi tendon of organ of right side is giving the nerve to the spinocerebellar tract of the right side, it will go into the right cerebellum. Okay, so this is important to understand that dorsal column crosses on the opposite side and goes to the opposite side of the cortex, while spinocerebellar tract is on the ipsilateral side. Okay, now we will discuss descending tract. In descending tract, corticospinal tract or pyramidal tract is very important. Corticospinal tract means it starts from the cortex, especially frontal cortex or frontal lobe. Okay, there is a motor cortex from which in which there are bed cells. Okay, so from this bed cells, this pyramidal tract will start. Okay, they will go into the corona radiata. That is, these are all subcortical structures. That is structures below cortex. Okay, it will travel in corona radiata. Then it will go to the internal capsule. Okay, so internal capsule has anterior limb, genu, and posterior limb. So in the anterior limb and genu, there will be motor pathways, and in the posterior limb, there will be sensory pathway. So when the third order neuron is going from thalamus to the postcentral gyrus, that is sensory cortex, it goes through this posterior limb of internal capsule, while this corticospinal tract goes from anterior limb of internal capsule. Okay, I hope I am clear with this. Okay, from internal capsule it will go in the brain stem. In brain stem, it is on the anterior part. Okay, if, for example, if this is midbrain, I have also showed this in my cranial nerve videos. This is your pyramidal tract. Anteriorly, both the sides they are present. Okay, then at the level of lower medulla, okay, the medulla will start becoming spinal cord. At the level of lower medulla, at the level of foramen magnum, from which spinal cord starts. Okay, at the level of this lower medulla, the corticospinal tract will decussate. Okay, they will cross over each other. Okay, so this is important. If right frontal lobe is affected, for example, in stroke, the left hemiplegia occurs. Why? Because the fibers that were coming from right frontal lobe are crossing at the level of the lower medulla on the opposite side. Okay, I hope I am clear with this. Okay, so this is important. Now in the spinal cord, after they cross in the spinal cord, they will be traveling ipsilaterally. So from the right frontal lobe, the pathway started from from frontal lobe, right frontal lobe. It will cross on the left side and it will travel in the left spinal cord and left part of the spinal cord, and it will supply the left muscles of the left side of the body. Okay, so basically in the spinal cord they are ipsilateral, in the brain they are contralateral. So I hope whenever the diseases affect the spinal cord, this will be very important. Okay, so they are divided into 2 parts. So the crossing are of only 80% of the fibers. Okay, 80% of the fibers of the corticospinal tract will cross at the level of the lower medulla. Okay, and they will form lateral corticospinal tract, which are the most important and main corticospinal tract. Okay, now 20% of the fibers won't cross at the level of the lower medulla. They will cross at the level of the segment of the spinal cord, which is supplying the muscles. Okay, that is something you have to understand. Okay, so they are crossing at the level of the spinal cord, not at the level of medulla. Okay, and after crossing this corticospinal tract, most of the corticospinal tract will travel in the lateral part of the white matter. Okay, again this is the heavily myelinated neurons. Okay, so they will travel in the lateral part of the white matter of the spinal cord. Okay, then they are going to synapse with, I told you, right, dorsal horn and dorsal root are part of sensory nerves or sensory system. Anterior horn and anterior root are part of, or ventral horn or ventral root are part of motor system. Okay, so they will synapse with anterior horn cell. Okay, so there is a cell body, that basically there is an interneuron, there is a cell body of that neuron present in the anterior horn, and this corticospinal tract will synapse with this anterior horn cell. Okay, and from this anterior horn cell axon will arrive and it will go into the muscle. So basically there is this corticospinal tract is controlling this anterior horn cell, which is actually supplying the muscles. Okay, muscles needed for movement. So remember, from cortex to anterior horn cell to muscle. Okay, so till this anterior horn cell, that is before this anterior horn cell, that is corticospinal tract, the name itself corticospinal tract is upper motor neuron. From this anterior horn cell to this muscle, from this anterior horn cell to this muscle, it is known as lower motor neuron. Till this it is known as upper motor neuron. So this will be important when we will discuss the lesions of upper motor neuron and lower motor neuron. Okay, so I hope I am clear about this pathway. It starts in the frontal lobe, goes into the spinal, goes into the brainstem till the anterior part of the brainstem. At the lower part of the medulla, and 80% of the fibers will cross on the opposite side. 20% will travel ipsilaterally. The 20% will cross at the level of the spinal cord segment. Okay, and after crossing this, all fibers will synapse with the anterior horn cell, from which the lower motor neuron starts, which supplies the muscle. Okay, that is, neuromuscular junction and then muscles. Okay, so I hope this is clear. Now remember, the motor controlled by the brain, as I told you, right, there is a corticospinal tract that is controlling the anterior horn cell because it is supplying the muscle. So also this anterior horn cell will be affected by the extrapyramidal system. So whenever this motor movements are controlled by the brain in a way where pyramidal tract and extrapyramidal tract are always in balance. So if one system is imbalanced, like for example in upper motor neuron lesion, then extrapyramidal system will start acting more and opposite can happen. Okay, so that's why they are always in the balance to control the movements of the body. Okay, now what are the extrapyramidal tracts? So we'll discuss that. There's a tectospinal tract, there's a rubrospinal tract, there's a vestibulospinal tract and reticulospinal tract. These four tracts are important. Tectospinal and rubrospinal starts from midbrain. Okay, tectum is present in midbrain. Okay, at the level of superior colliculus. Again, I have discussed this superior colliculus in my cranial nerve anatomy videos. Okay, so at the level of superior colliculus, this tectospinal tract starts in the tectum, and it mediates a reflex postural movement of the head in response to visual and acoustic input. So if someone is calling you from the behind, your head moves towards that side. Okay, that is your reflex movement of the head. Okay, so that is done by tectospinal tract. Then rubrospinal tract. Again, rubro means red nucleus that is present in midbrain. It starts from red nucleus and it goes into the spinal cord and controls the muscles. Okay, so it originates from the magnocellular subdivision of the red nucleus. They are direct connection with motor neurons innervating wrist muscle, basically distal muscles. Okay, now vestibulospinal tract. It starts from vestibular nuclei present at the pontomedullary junction. Okay, and this is very important, vestibulospinal, because it is responsible to maintain the posture of the person. Okay, so when you are standing, your extensor. So which are the muscles of posture basically? So these are extensors. Okay, mostly extensors, especially of lower limb and of back muscles. So extensors of back and extensors of lower limb. So this, what happens is, this vestibulospinal tract is giving the muscle strength to this extensor muscle, so that a person can stand or have a posture. Okay, so there's a tone. what is tone? Tone is the resting state of the muscle. In the resting state of the muscle, when the muscle is not contracting, muscle has some strength or some power in it. Okay, so that is for the postural muscles, for the extensor muscles, it is given by vestibulospinal tract. So if this spinal tract is lost, or if this vestibulospinal tract is lost, then there is a problem with the postures. Okay, posture. Then reticulospinal tract. Reticulospinal tract starts from the reticular system, okay, that is present in the brainstem. Okay, it is present in the brainstem, mostly in the pons, okay, medial part of the brainstem. It is responsible for coordinated gross movements primary of proximal muscles, especially of the upper limb. Again, for the posture, you need proximal muscles of the shoulders, of the hip, proximal muscles of the shoulders, of the hips, and of the back. Okay, so this proximal muscle is controlled by reticulospinal tract. Okay, and distal muscles like this of fingers, for fine movements it is required, and that is controlled by corticospinal tract. Okay, so reticulospinal tract is important. They are responsible for proximal muscle gross movements, and also whereas the CST mediates fine movements, particularly of the hand. Okay, so I hope I am clear in this. These are your extrapyramidal tracts. Now this is the segment of the spinal cord. Okay, here just to understand the topography of the tracts. Okay, so this is lateral spinothalamic tract. As you can see, SLTC means sacral, lumbar, thoracic, and cervical fibers. As you can see, sacral is lateral, okay, and cervical is medial, also anterior and posterior, but important is lateral and medial. So sacral is lateral, cervical is medial. Also for lateral corticospinal tract, it is the same topography in the spinal cord. What does it mean? Sacral fibers means it is coming from the lower limb. Cervical fibers means it is coming from the upper limb. So the topography arrangement of the fibers is such that sacral fibers or the lower limb fibers are most lateral in the spinal cord, and cervical fibers or the upper limb fibers are most medial. But for dorsal column, it is opposite. As you can see, fasciculus gracilis, which is medially, there is sacral and lumbar fibers. That means the lower limb muscles or the lower limb fibers are medial and the upper limb fibers are lateral. So this is the topography that you have to understand. Why? Because if some lesion is affecting from the outside, so the spinothalamic tract and corticospinal tract, there will be lower limb disorders, and for dorsal column it will be upper limb. Okay, so that's why this topography you have to understand. It is very important and very easy to remember. Okay, so this was all about the CNS tract. If you really like my video and if you really understood it, please click the like button, please share, and please subscribe. Thank you so much.